All right. So, hi, Ellen. So,
Hi.
we were chatting just a little bit beforehand. We officially met last week
Hmm.
and had what I felt was a wonderful conversation because
Yeah.
we both found out that we're from the same state, which is one of those like small world details that I never would have thought would have happened. But you are, you know what? Why don't you introduce yourself before we get going too far?
Sure. I am Ellen Summey. I've been a military spouse for almost 17 years now. My husband's in the Air Force. We have been stationed overseas three times now. So I have a lot of overseas experience. And over those years, I've become a really passionate advocate for military spouse employment opportunities because um, that has been one of the biggest challenges for me as a military spouse has been the difficulty in maintaining my own career, which of course is affected to your own sense of identity and self-worth and all this other stuff. So that's something I've really become passionate about over the years. And I think that's why we're talking today, because I kind of turned into a big mouth on this topic. And that's something that people are coming to know me for, which is interesting and good.
Well, and that's kind of how I found you was because I noticed on LinkedIn I would keep seeing your name pop up on different things about spouse employment, and we have a few mutual friends that you would comment on their stuff, or that would see them comment on yours, and I'd be like, okay, what is Ellen about? And
Mhm.
then I started kind of following you there, and I was like, man, she not only are you passionate about it, but you know your stuff. Like you're not one of those people that just gets out there and says, "Oh, this." You're like, "No, this is why it's an issue, and here's the data that shows why it's an issue." So,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's something that I've talked about personally in my own life and with my
Mhm.
own friends for years. And I kind of realized at a certain point, like it is not it is not other people's responsibility to care about this. We have
Right.
to explain it and show numbers and make it make sense, right? Show why this is important, show why this issue is something that our leaders need to be aware of and need to be helping us find solutions for. And I think it all comes down to the numbers, right? I heard
Mhm.
a saying one time that makes a lot of sense, that what gets measured gets done. And
Right.
so that's kind of been my approach now. Like, okay, we have to show, how does this impact military readiness? How does this impact national security? And it sounds a little bit like a stretch at first to make that connection, like, well, military spouse employment affects national security. But if you really start
Mhm.
digging into it and looking at the numbers, it does. And I think that's a surprise to people the first time they hear that. But numbers in this case, I don't think they're lying.
No, and they usually don't. And you told me something interesting last week while we were chatting that I was completely unaware of, about one of the things that's the top three reasons why active duty members leave the Army specifically.
Yeah. The Army does it's similar to an exit survey,
Mhm.
right? So every soldier who leaves active duty is asked to complete a survey and talk about their reasons for why they're leaving the service.
Mhm.
And over the last couple of years, it has consistently been, I think, the top two. The
Okay.
first reason was typically op tempo and deployments. And
Mhm.
the number two reason has been the impact to their spouse's career, which I find really, really fascinating. So if if it's impacting people to that extent that it's really affecting retention,
Mhm.
right? Right now, the Army is not suffering a retention crisis, but it is suffering a recruitment crisis. And I
Right.
do believe that those two things are linked.
Yeah, and I feel this is a very timely conversation that we're having as the government is looking at yet another discussion of a possible shutdown
Yeah.
and how that is affecting. And I remember I was talking to my wife about it. I said, this is one of those things where civilians hear it, people that are non-military, they hear a government shutdown. They're like, oh, well, why is that really that big a deal? But then when you start looking at families' ability to put food on the table, And a lot of
Yeah,
civilians are like, oh, well, the military members get back pay. Well, that back pay doesn't help you if you miss your mortgage payment or if you
correct.
can't go buy groceries. And so having spouses that are employed can kind of have that a little bit of a backstop and take a little of that pressure off if they're able to find
Yeah.
employment that's not in the military.
Yeah, and food insecurity is already a problem in military families. I saw a statistic recently that something like a quarter of active duty families are currently facing food insecurity. So tell me how beneficial you think it may be to ask them to skip a paycheck or two in the meantime, right? And I
Right.
saw some advice being passed around through semi-official channels saying, well, here's some things that you can do in the meantime. You could pawn some family jewelry. You could, your spouse could take up a second job. I work as a federal contractor, and my civilian colleagues right now are feeling nervous.
Mm-hmm.
I work with a friend there who is a single mom, and she's like, I'm the only person paying the bills at my house. It's not an easy ask for me to skip a paycheck or two.
Right.
I've got a mortgage, I've got all these other responsibilities, and she is currently considering looking for a part-time job just to pay the bills in the meantime if this
Mm-hmm.
shutdown does happen. I Ellen's personal take on all of this business is that it's really irresponsible of our senior leaders to let this happen. And I have felt that way every time that we have come to this position. I will never forget where I was in 2013
Mm-hmm.
when there was a shutdown for a time. We were in the middle of a PCS.
Oh,
We were
geez.
trying to leave Little Rock Air Force Base in Arkansas.
Mm-hmm.
I had a 1 year old. My husband had just finished training there. And we discovered that without PCS orders, there's a lot of things you can't do.
Right.
And if the office is shut down and not printing orders, you're just definitely in a holding pattern
Mm-hmm.
for some time. We were in negotiations to buy a house, but trying to get a mortgage as an active duty family without orders is
Mm-hmm.
not as easy as you might think. So it's definitely a source of frustration for us, but I know it's much more than frustration for a lot of other people. It's an actual it creates fear and a real uncertainty of what's to come.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this seems to be coming, and this is my personal take. It seems to be becoming more and more common because
Mm-hmm.
I can remember, you mentioned in 2013, which we were actually at Little Rock also, not at 2013. We were there 2 bases ago.
Mm-hmm.
So I remember it happening in 13. We were at Barksdale.
Mm-hmm.
I remember it happening in, was that 2018? Whenever it was either 2017 or 2018 when they actually did, because I was working as a government employee at Eielson
Mm-hmm.
and actually had to sign the furlough paperwork and go home for a
Yeah.
couple of days.
Wow.
So it seems to be happening more and more, and that again goes back to additional stress on the family and plays right back into spouse employment, because without the ability to help provide for your family, or at least feel like you're providing for your family, that's a lot of stress. And
It is. Yeah, it is. And so there was a study done looking at the causes of food insecurity in military families.
mhm,
And as you would imagine, military spouse unemployment was one of the leading causes. So we know that that is a direct impact, and that better employment opportunities for spouses creates happier, healthier, more stable military families, which is only good for the service member and for recruitment and retention and everything else. So to me, it is an obvious priority, but I think there are still some people who maybe don't understand or who are not able to connect the dots quite yet. So we have to just continue spreading the word and helping to educate people about why this is so important and showing the impacts, because people who do not uh, closely associate with active duty military families, or who
mhm,
don't personally know active duty military families, have a really hard time, I think, understanding what this lifestyle is like. You see all these happy homecoming videos online on CNN or YouTube.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, Army veteran comes home and surprises his wife at I saw one yesterday. It was like he surprised his wife as she was in line for a Luke Bryan concert, and it was
Mm-hmm.
so great, and they hugged and cried. But that's one very small sliver of time, and it
Right.
doesn't tell the whole picture. It doesn't tell the whole story. So
Right.
we have to, you want to be careful that you're not only sharing the negatives and
Mm-hmm.
only making this seem like a really raw deal, because it's not. It's much more complex and nuanced, but we
Mm-hmm.
have to help people understand the full picture.
And I think part of understanding that full picture is going back to what you said earlier about the data. You told me some very interesting statistics last week. A couple of them I knew, but one of them I didn't, and that was the spouse unemployment rate.
Mm-hmm. Has been at 22%, give or take, over the last decade.
Yeah.
Over the last decade.
And
And that is higher than almost any other group. I don't know if you follow Michael Quinn on LinkedIn,
I
right?
do. Mm-hmm.
He's kind of LinkedIn famous. He is an Army veteran who is now running a company that helps to put veterans and spouses into careers. And he says, or I've heard him say, that military spouses are one of the most economically disadvantaged groups in the US. I found that really interesting.
That is interesting because I know one thing that from my personal experience that people say is like, oh, well, y'all are in the military, y'all have money. And I'm like,
Mm.
what? It's like,
We have
where?
TRICARE.
Yeah.
That's
I
not the
mean,
same thing.
yeah, it's not. I mean, they're like, oh, well, y'all can shop on base. I'm like, it's not always cheaper.
It's tax-free, which is nice, but not all of us live near an installation. I don't currently. I would have to drive to another country to get to one.
Right.
So yes, there is a benefit to having access to the commissaries and the exchanges,
Mm-hmm.
but come on, that doesn't make up for an entire lost salary,
No, not at all. I I saw some other statistics. So we both know that the vast majority of military spouses are female. Like
Mhm.
that's I mean, the military has been a boys' club since its inception.
Yeah.
But you know, they're not. This stat did shock me because I thought it was actually a little bit higher. Apparently, 92% of spouses are women. I
Mhm.
actually thought that it was higher than that, but so to see that there's more male spouses out there is kind of encouraging to me.
Yeah, you're not alone.
I'm not alone. There's 8% of us out there. But one of the things that people like to say is, oh, well, the spouse should go get a degree. The spouse should do this. They should get these certificates. And we have both heard that forever
And done that.
and done that. But I saw want to make sure 89% of spouses, of female spouses specifically, do have college degrees.
Hmm.
30% have 4-year degrees and 15% have advanced degrees. So it
Mhm.
doesn't seem like education is an issue here when it comes to spouse employment.
Yeah, that's so the first time I had a big career gap was when we moved to Germany when I was
Mhm.
still a newlywed. And I was in a panic about it. I mean, I was applying everywhere. I had always been working full time, even partially while I was still in school full time in
Mhm.
undergrad. And so for me to be unemployed was just this really new experience. And I did not like it. And, my husband was very busy at work all the time. He, at that time, was an Air Force pilot. He was flying, he was gone a lot. And so I had nothing, right?
Right.
I left my family, my home, my job, everybody, and moved to a foreign country where I
Mhm.
knew no one. And I was so distraught about this career gap that I thought, okay, that's it, grad school right now. Right. I will keep up the job hunt. I will continue looking, but I'm going to start grad school, and at least I will have something to show for this
Mhm.
gap in my career. And I know so many people who have done that. And thankfully there are great programs that can help with tuition costs for military spouses. There are some universities in the US that will give in-state tuition rates to military spouses no
Mhm.
matter no matter what state they actually reside in, which is amazing. There are other scholarship programs for spouses, and all of those things are great. But I have to say, even though I took advantage of that and got the bulk of my grad degree paid for, and I went back and took advantage of the free PMP certification, and I did other classes and certifications, none of those things got me a job. And more importantly, none of those things helped me keep a job when it came time to move again, because that's the real hurdle, right?
Right.
We are resilient. We are hardworking. We know how to, as the saying goes, bloom where you're planted. We know how to do that.
Right.
The real hurdle is trying to continue growth in that career when it's time to move again. And so many times I have done just like every other spouse and said, okay, well, I guess I have to resign then, and I'll try to start again somewhere new. And it's the same song and dance, and it's very difficult. Professionally, it's difficult. Personally, it puts a strain on your family. It puts a strain on your marriage. It can really affect your sense of self-worth. And having been in those trenches so many times over the last 17 years, right, it really became super important to me to share my experience with other spouses who were coming up behind me, because there were times when I thought something must be wrong with me.
Right.
How is this so hard? It seems like it shouldn't be this hard to build a career. And I realized, no, it feels this difficult because it actually is that difficult.
Yes.
And if it's that hard for me as a pretty privileged person, I would say, right? I'm married to an officer. It was never a concern of whether we're going to be able to afford food or not. I didn't have children for the first 10 years, so I didn't have to worry about finding childcare for my kids, which can be a really big hurdle.
Oh yeah.
You know, I was like the ideal candidate to be able to go out and find a job. And if it was that hard for me, I was really at a loss for what to say to other spouses. It feels a little bit, it feels like not enough to just tell them, yeah, you're right, it is really hard.
Yeah.
You know, I wanted to be able to offer something more, offer suggestions or ideas or resources. And that's kind of where I am now.
You know, and we were, and one thing that kills me is people say, oh, well, you can just go get a job anywhere. And sometimes that's not always the thing. You know, what we were discussing last week, that one of the big pushes from the DoD is, oh, well, we're helping with licensing, and which is wonderful, and I'm very happy they're
Yes.
doing that. But not every spouse is cut out to work in the medical field, or
Right. I
cut
don't
out
have a
to,
professional license,
yeah.
you
I
know,
don't I
so
don't have one either.
I think that's fantastic for the people who do have a license, but even still, the implementation of that is still not very clear. I saw a news article in the last few weeks about a spouse who is suing whatever state she is residing in right now because she was trying to do that license reciprocity across
Right.
state lines, and the state basically said no because
Oh
they didn't know
wow.
how to do it, because this
Right.
is so new. There's not a real clear path for how to make this work. And so yes, it looks great on paper. And yes, I'm super enthused about anything that the government does to try to help lighten this load for military spouses trying to build careers. I think, again, what gets measured gets done. And it will
Right.
be very interesting to see the numbers on how many people this is affecting.
And I don't know about you, you're more tied into it than I am, but I haven't seen any numbers on the back end about what's actually being measured for how many people these programs like this have benefited.
No, I am not aware. It's even hard to find numbers about spouse unemployment rates overseas, right? We talked about that 22% figure
Right.
for spouses, but that's across all branches and it's everywhere. And you and I both know that people who are overseas have a much more difficult situation.
Yeah, insanely
And I
difficult.
think that the numbers in OCONUS assignments have got to be, I would think, 60 to 70%. That's if you include the people who have just given up.
Right. And I would say that's almost a modest estimation, because
Yeah.
the ability to, even for just a foreigner to get work in those countries, Like, because whenever we go to Germany, we're the foreigners. So like for our
We
work,
are. And so in Germany and in a lot of other countries, we are on what's called a status of forces agreement. So it's not like you're just a tourist or,
right?
somebody who's coming in on a regular visa, but the rules vary from country to country.
Hmm.
This was a really big problem in Italy,
Yeah.
where spouses who were there on orders with a service member were not allowed to work in country. And just in the last few weeks, the Italian government issued a sort of memo saying effectively, yes, American spouses can work, but they should work remotely for US based
Hmm.
employers. And even then, if they're working remotely for US based employers, they're still going to owe income taxes to Italy and to the US. The only exception would be if those spouses were working remotely for either state, local, or federal government within the US, then they would only owe taxes to the US government. But that's not as easy as it sounds either. I mean, there's so much there. There's so much to unpack. There is a process for federal civilians to be approved to work remotely from
Hmm.
overseas, but it is a very arduous and very time consuming process. And a lot of those requests are denied.
Yeah, we
So,
talked about that. It's the whole, whenever somebody made a policy to cover one specific area because of a certain threat or geographic requirement, and they're like, you know what, this policy is great. We're just going to apply it to everybody, but not
yeah,
if you're living in Italy or Germany or Denmark, you don't need
yeah,
somebody to come inspect your house because
yeah.
there's terrorists kicking in your front door, you know?
So, yeah, that was specifically about the State Department's domestic employee teleworking overseas program, which
Right.
is technically the only correct way for a federal civilian employee to be authorized to work overseas.
Hmm.
But that is, again, a very arduous and time consuming process, is through the State Department and through your employing agency. And the State Department often requires a lot of steps that, in my view, don't always make sense. So
Right.
there was a problem with people applying to use this in Germany because the embassy is in Berlin.
Hmm.
And so it was a responsibility of the embassy to inspect the housing that these spouses were going to be living in and working from. And so, if you've got 20,000 spouses who live in the
Right.
Ramstein area, and now suddenly the embassy in Berlin is responsible for inspecting housing for the ones who want to work remotely for the government. I mean, that's a huge problem. And so you can understand, of course, why this causes hangups, but
Right.
there's got to be a better solution.
Yeah, and it's one of those things where if it doesn't pass the sniff test, it shouldn't be getting written. You know,
Mm-hmm.
it
Yeah,
doesn't
I
it
think
doesn't make a lot of sense.
since it is a State Department program, I have to assume that it was probably written originally for spouses of foreign service officers, and they may be living anywhere. I mean, they live
Right.
in almost every country around the world. And so
Mhm.
you can understand in those cases why you would want the embassy to go out and inspect the housing that these people are living in,
Mhm.
because, you know, obviously, if you're living in China or you're living in Russia or you're living
Right.
in Cuba or anywhere else that maybe is not super friendly with the US government,
Mhm.
yes, it makes total sense to go inspect their housing. Um, but we're talking about remote work, and we're talking about some people who live on a military
Right.
installation, a US
Exactly.
military installation, right?
Yeah.
So there's there I think are some rules that maybe could be looked at again.
Mhm.
I obviously did not write that policy. I'm not an expert on that policy, but I think there is some room probably to make a few changes.
I don't see how there's not. I mean, especially whenever you consider that we're getting into an age now where technology is progressing at light speed,
Mm-hmm.
and even people that do some forms of, we'll just say, sensitive work are able to do
Mm-hmm.
that from home, and
Yeah,
they don't have to go to the office to do that work that is considered sensitive.
yeah, you're exactly right. I drafted a post this morning from my LinkedIn that will go up later about remote jobs at my current company that require a clearance. Because that's a conversation I have with people from time to time. Oh, well, no, I can't work remotely because I work with, this type of information or that type of information. And that's not necessarily true.
Not.
I did a quick search on the first page of our remote job listings. I found 5 or 6 that require anywhere between a secret clearance and a TSSCI, and they are all remote.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating. And there is software to enable certain types of work like that. The Army was doing a pilot earlier this year or last year. I hate to throw numbers out if I can't remember, but they were testing software that would allow remote access to classified systems. And it does exist. It's just a matter of, do we trust it? Do we trust you? Do we trust the software? Right. Does it make sense to allow this kind of work to be done remotely? And I have to sort of temper my own thoughts and statements about this because I'm a huge advocate of remote work. And right. I know that it's not always the best for every situation, but deep in my heart, I want to be like, yay, remote work, it's the best.
Well, and you're right. It's remote work because to me, you've landed what many people would consider the unicorn job.
Yes.
You found a remote job that's going to allow you to quite literally work from wherever.
Yes.
Because as we've discussed, your company is on the East Coast and you are not even in the country.
Nope. And it was not always a very clear, straightforward path to making that happen. It did involve some conversations with some decision makers within the company and also at my Army client's office, that had to be approved by them as well. They had to agree to let me take the government laptop out of the country. I had to, talk to them about a lot of that. But ultimately, because the client knew me, the client had worked with me, trusted me, and wanted me to be able to stay on the contract, they pushed to make it happen. And similarly, my supervisor at SAIC, where I work, wanted to keep me as well. She saw the value in remote work and she saw the value in keeping me on the team, and she really pushed to make it happen. And so without them and without their advocacy, it could have been a different story. And I feel super, super grateful that we were able to make that happen.
But that, to me, that just shows the benefit of having military spouses in some of these positions, because for one, what I have found is that we are incredibly hardworking, because I know for me, it's been so difficult to find work that usually once I find work, I put everything into it.
You're so desperate to prove yourself almost.
Yes. Yeah. And so having that security of, oh, hey, we're getting ready to move, I'm sorry. And if my employer would have been like, what do you mean you're sorry? We're keeping you on. I don't care where you are. All it's going to do is make me want to work that much harder for somebody that's putting their faith in me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, you're absolutely right. And to be fair, I think I probably work harder from home than I ever did in an office. I don't have as many distractions here at home, first of all. Nobody's making Starbucks runs from home. But right. I'm also very, very careful about my professional integrity. I never want there to be a question of whether I'm working hard enough. I never want there to be a question of if I'm actually online when I say I'm online, because I know that I'm not only representing myself, I'm representing other military spouses who want this same opportunity. And if I mess it up, then I mess it up for other people too. So I am so conscious of that all the time.
Yeah, and it's one of those things we talked about it a little bit. COVID showed that remote work works. Whenever the entire government was working from home for almost 2 full years.
Yeah.
That there's almost no reason for the vast majority of works or of jobs to, at the bare minimum, be hybrid. To where you don't have to go to the office every single day. Matter of fact, a buddy of mine back in Georgia, he's OSI and was working from home. And everything those guys do is at the bare minimum sensitive.
Mm-hmm.
So,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. We
so
have
the I,
options.
yeah.
I think that allowing work flexibility,
Mhm.
which doesn't always have to mean telework, remote work. It doesn't
Right.
always have to mean odd hours, but allowing work flexibility
Mhm.
allows you to recruit from a better and a wider pool of candidates for these jobs. And I've seen that play out with various job listings, both in my own company
Mhm.
and at my Army client's office there on Fort Belvoir. The jobs that are listed that allow remote work or remote flexibility get tons of applications
Oh yeah.
as compared to some of the traditional in office roles. And I think that, like I said, it's not always best for every role or every type of role or even every person. I
Right.
know some folks who prefer to be strictly in the office, and I think that's great if that works for you, if that
Mhm.
suits you. There is always going to be an office that you can sit in, most likely,
Right.
especially if you're working with any connection to the federal government. We love offices.
Yes, they do.
But allowing that remote flexibility allows retention, it improves recruitment, and I have to think that it's good for morale.
Yeah. How could it not be good for morale if, for example, whenever my spouse deploys and I'm not working, but I'm trying to work, you know, she's if I'm at home complaining about work, she can't focus on, or lack of work for that matter, she can't focus on the mission because now she's worried about stuff going on at home.
Yeah.
So that's, now we're going back to mission readiness.
Yeah. It's a real problem. And I've seen over the years how it has affected my husband too when I'm
Mhm.
not able to work. I am a miserable cow when I'm not able to work. I'm just not happy because I enjoy the work that I do. I
Yeah.
love it. I love the clients that I work with. I love the teammates. I love the mission. And so I feel like I just lose so much that brings me joy when
Mhm.
I'm not able to work. And that affects everything. That's that saying, right? When mama ain't happy, ain't nobody happy.
Facts.
That's very much what it feels like. And it makes my husband really have to second guess assignments
Right.
and okay, would I really want to take that promotion? Would I really want to take that school assignment if that means that we're going to move again and that's going to be another year, another 2 years that
Right.
Ellen can't work? That it creates so much tension and unhappiness that it affects his career too, and not just mine.
Right. Uh what is something that you hear a lot from spouses? Because I'm sure with how vocal you are, you probably get a lot of people reaching out, asking for your input, asking your advice. What is something that you hear a lot from spouses about some challenges that they're facing in and trying to find work?
It's the things that we've talked about, that they can't get interviews, they can't get calls back because their resume is so choppy, right?
Mhm.
Oh, I spent 8 months working at this job and then we had to move, and then I spent 6 months here, but then I got picked up for a full-time job at this company, so
Mhm.
then I was there for another 9 months and then we moved again. And that's not an exaggeration, you
No, I
know.
I know it's not. I can show you my resume.
There is a real bias against people who are perceived to be job hoppers.
Right. Right.
And with hiring managers and with recruiters, there's not always an understanding of why that is the way it is for us. So it's seen as almost like a character fault. Oh, you must not be reliable, you must be flighty, you're gonna jump ship as soon as you get bored, when
Right.
that's really not the case. So many of us are just desperate to find somewhere where we can maintain a career
Mhm.
and grow a career. And allowing that opportunity, allowing people the flexibility to either work remotely or transfer to another location when they have to
Mhm.
move, if that's an option, it it creates just so much gratitude and such a desire to really prove yourself and to demonstrate your worth. When somebody is willing to kind of stick out their neck a little bit and take
Yeah.
a risk and take a chance on you, you feel almost so humbled and so gratified
Mhm.
that you would do anything to make it up to them.
Right.
And unfortunately, there's no shortcut to that.
Right.
because the people who are willing to do that, usually they're willing to do that for people that they already know.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot harder to take a chance on somebody that has not proven themselves to you.
Right.
And, I wrote recently about all of these amazing educational programs that I've taken advantage of, and
Mm-hmm.
all of the certifications and the classes and all the things that are so great. And I don't want to knock them because they are helpful. But the thing that has made the biggest difference in my career, bar none, has been having a supervisor who cares
Right.
and who is willing to fight for me above all else, above
Mm-hmm.
everything else. That has been the biggest impact. And so how do you get there? There's really not an easy path, and that's difficult. And that's what's so hard for me to explain to other spouses, because you don't want to you don't want to dash their hopes. You want to
Right.
show them, oh, here's a shortcut. All you have to do is A plus B equals C, and there you go. But
If it was only that easy.
if that exists, I haven't found it yet in
Me either.
17 years.
And it's we talk about the education and having supervisors that stick at their necks out for you. And something you just mentioned was the having those choppy resumes and looking flighty. And that's whenever people look at my resume, they're like, oh, well, why are you only here for so long and only here for so long? I wonder how much of that looking at people with choppy work history is still sort of a byproduct of that mentality of, oh, somebody's going to be here for 30 years and retire.
Mm-hmm.
Whenever current data that I've seen shows that even non-military people are only staying at jobs 3 to 5 years before they go
Mm-hmm.
somewhere else.
Mm-hmm.
So I
Yeah.
wonder if some of that is just not understanding that nobody's really staying somewhere for a gold watch anymore. They're going somewhere
Yeah.
and they're working to get to the progressing as far as they feel they can progress somewhere, and then they're going somewhere else.
Yeah. Career mobility really kind of includes employer mobility too,
Mm-hmm.
for a lot of people, and across a lot of industries as well. I I remember always breathing a huge sigh of relief anytime I crossed the 1 year threshold
Yes.
at a job, because I was like, oh, thank God, I can leave this on my resume now.
Yes.
I've been here long enough that I don't have to try to cover that gap when we leave, and,
Right.
go back to school and say, oh, I was a full-time student. I felt like the 1 year mark was at least respectable enough that I could leave it on, because there were definitely some other jobs that I have removed completely, because it's just not worth it. It creates that choppy resume that we all try so hard to avoid.
Right. I know. And then on top of that, you start running into how many times have you heard oh, you're overqualified?
Yeah, I know. Somebody asked me, this was like 2010 or 2011. We were in California at Travis Air Force Base, and this was, the housing market had tanked. There was a lot of unemployment, particularly in that area, and I was trying so hard. I was trying so hard to find a job, and I went on an interview. At this time, I had, a graduate degree. I had several years of federal experience, and I was interviewing basically for an administrative job at UC Davis, which is right down the road. And they asked me during the interview, why do you want this job? And I had to really think on my feet really fast and say, oh, well, this is such an amazing organization. It would be just such a privilege to work here. And I couldn't tell if their eyes were actually rolling or if I just imagined that their eyes were rolling. But yeah, they didn't come right out and say you're overqualified, but it was
Mm-hmm.
definitely like they did mention, well, you've got this experience and that
Mm-hmm.
experience. Why do you want to work in this job?
Mm-hmm.
Because nobody else will hire me, please. You know,
Oh my God.
there's a time for honesty, and that is not it.
Look, so I told you last week that I was applying to Lowe's,
Mm-hmm.
and so their process works incredibly fast because it's all AI.
Mm-hmm.
You fill out the application, you fill out it's not even an application, it's a work interest, and then you get a automated response. Pick your interview times. So the first person I talked to was one of the managers for that day, which they had kind of already gotten under my skin because the interview started late. Like, don't tell me to be there at 11 and then you don't start talking to me until 11:15. I'm sorry. That's just bugs me. But their first question was, well, tell me your work history. Like, what kind of work history do you have? And I was like, trying to figure out, like, so I was like, I'm sorry, I don't know exactly how to answer that question because I've done this, I've done this. And they asked me that exact same question. I finished going through that. They said, why do you want to work here?
Yeah.
And again, I did the same thing. I was like, well, Lowe's has been incredible for military families. I love, I like to shop at Lowe's. I really like what they do for the military community. I think that would be awesome to be a part of that team.
Mm-hmm.
And I was thinking in my head, oh crap.
Yeah. And you don't mind the 2 master's degrees that I have.
I didn't even say that.
I won't bring that up on the job. Yeah.
I didn't.
Yeah.
Not a word of education. I didn't say any of that. I was like,
nope.
And then as I'm going through my work experience, I'm like, stop talking, Mike, stop talking. You've told him too much. Like, I should have just stuck with the fact that I had worked retail in college and just left it alone and not gone through everything after that.
I look good in blue. I don't know.
I like vest.
I love warehouses. The smell of lumber.
Yeah, it makes me happy. And then I find out yesterday that I didn't get the job. So
perfect. Of course not.
Of course not. And this goes back to what I said earlier about people saying, well, you can just work anywhere. Couldn't get a job at Lowe's.
No, you can't. I know. And that's to say nothing of the people who are still having to pay off student loans at the same time. You can't do that on a minimum wage type of job, right? I'm grateful I don't have any student loans to worry about, but a lot of people do. And so saying, especially to a military spouse, oh, well, I heard they're hiring at the daycare center on base. Fantastic. That's a wonderful job for the people who want to work in that field, but that's not really going to cover my student loan payments. And that's not the career field that I'm trained for. And I think that's something that we have to get real about too, is not all military spouses are women, like you said. Not all of us work in those traditional type of fields. We're not nurses. We're not teachers. There are military spouses with PhDs. There are military spouses who are attorneys. There are military spouses who are physicians, military spouses who run companies. I know a military spouse who's a helicopter pilot, and a lot of military spouses who are veterans as well. And that can be a really hard transition when you are part of a dual military couple, and the one person decides to either retire or separate and then transition into that spouse role. That can be a real challenge. You lose part of that personal identity that you have. You start to understand for the first time some of these challenges that have not really applied to you before. That you're not a real full person without your sponsor. It's it can I think be a really difficult change in the life of those people.
It's so much of, and I've had this conversation with other people. One of the things that a lot of spouses struggle with is that identity. And a lot of times, not even necessarily working in a job that you're trained for, but just working in a job that you feel connected to can help you with that identity. It's going to improve your mental health. It's going to improve your home life.
Yes, that was a big thing for me. In that first overseas assignment in Germany, once I did finally get my first full-time job, where I was an Army civilian. I was working for the Army garrison there in Kaiserslautern, and I loved it. I loved it. I loved the team that I worked with. I loved all of the weird idiosyncrasies of being a federal civilian. I loved the Army, which is interesting because I married into the Air Force. My dad was in the Air Force too, so I went and started working for the Army, but I loved it. I adored those people. I adored the sense of humor. I adored all of it. And it did so much in terms of my quality of life, right? I had a reason to get up every day because let me tell you, being a stay-at-home spouse overseas with no kids and nothing to do, you really don't have much to get up for every day,
Yeah.
unless you're like an athlete who's really focused on, I want to get up every day and,
Mhm.
run 15 miles or whatever. I did not have that. I'm not a jock. I'm not a runner. And so I really did not have a thing. I
Right.
didn't have my own thing. And I discovered at that time how important that is for me personally. Let me tell you, very, very, very important for me.
Yeah, because in that kind of situation, like it's a real conversation with yourself of, do I take a shower today or not? Because I didn't do anything yesterday or the day
Nobody's going to
before,
notice if I don't, right? Yeah. It's
right?
it's it's a really interesting place to be. Um, I felt fairly isolated.
Mhm.
I spent, the people that I did hang out with at that time, I was still young. I was in my mid 20s. I hung out with a lot of Air Force pilots, which
Mhm.
is fun. They're a fun group of people, but I'm not a pilot. That's not
Right.
my group, right? Ultimately, you're still kind of an outsider.
Mhm.
Um, you've got to have your own thing. And I think maybe that's not true for everybody to the same extent that it was for me,
Yeah.
but for me it was a big deal.
Well, and that's something that it goes back to this to the, it feeds into everything else we've been talking about. There's not going to be a blanket answer for everybody, but having more options to fit more of those metrics, more of those little people that maybe want to do, maybe there's some people that want to work hybrid, maybe there's people that want to work fully remote, but finding a way to actually make it easier for spouses to work in more
Mm-hmm.
of these situations. Because I mean, we both, you can go on USA Jobs right now and filter jobs by military spouses, but how is that getting measured on the back end to say if it's actually helping?
Yeah, I don't know. It's really interesting. The last time I checked, the US federal government is the largest employer on planet Earth.
Yeah.
And if any employer is well suited to solve this problem,
Hmm.
it's the US federal government. And thankfully, they are also the employer that has the largest vested interest in solving this problem,
Yes.
right? I think that with some creativity
Hmm.
and with a willingness to try some new approaches, we could really make a big dent in this issue. And I say we like I'm part of the federal government. I'm not. But what I would love to see would be an approach kind of like that GS 7, 9,
Right.
11 internship program that we
Hmm.
use for certain career fields. I've seen it used in STEM careers. I've seen it
Hmm.
used for public affairs and other type of career fields where you bring in new college graduates. They still
Hmm.
have to apply and they have to
Yep.
qualify, but they have no relation
Hmm.
to the government. They're just a private citizen. So you bring them in at a GS7, you build in training into the
Hmm.
program, and you have planned out that they're going to rotate across a few different organizations during their time.
Hmm.
And within, what is it, like a 2 year, a 3 year window, they are in that GS11 full
Yep.
time permanent position.
Yep.
And again, that would not work for every type of job series. It wouldn't work for every type of
Hmm.
role, and not everyone wants to do that. But I would love to see the government create an internship program like that,
Hmm.
that is remote, flexible, remote
Yes.
possible
Hmm.
for military spouses. And you could choose 5 or 6 different job series. You
Hmm.
could choose, 0301. You could choose a public affairs job
Hmm.
series. You could choose administrative job series and set them up from the beginning to be remote friendly
Hmm.
and offer that career pathway, that defined career pathway to allow spouses to retain
Hmm.
those federal positions when they have to PCS. I think that could be huge. I think it could be a really big game changer.
It absolutely could. And if there's one organization that has ease of access to the data to show how it would be impactful, it's the US government. Because they could figure this out in roughly a year.
Mm.
Because and I'm going and that's and to me that's even giving them more time than they need, because that is a simple, hey, HR, NAF, send us your numbers on how many people are military spouses. Because
Yeah.
because that's data that most spouses put in their form when they get hired.
Yes,
So
certainly if they're applying with military spouse preference, then
right.
that data would exist. Um, I am by no means a data expert, and and I also don't play one on television, so I won't pretend to have those answers.
You didn't stay at a Holiday Inn last night?
No, I did not stay at a Holiday Inn last night. But I know that there are really smart people who could
Mhm.
find those answers and who could solve that problem. Um, again, what gets measured gets done.
Yeah,
So I
absolutely.
think the first step is data.
Mhm.
What at what rates are spouses being hired right now compared to non-spouses? How many spouses are applying to jobs with military spouse preference? That one certainly we should know because that's
Yeah,
all in USA Jobs. How many applications are coming in with military spouse preference versus how many are being hired with military spouse preference? That should kind of be a way to gauge interest at
right.
least. And it would also show you which job series they're applying for most frequently. And maybe that would be a place to start.
Yeah. Well, are you familiar with the preferred placement program? So you have
Yes, I
this
am.
your spouse preference, and then you have the
Yep.
PPP.
Yep. Which I
The
think PPP has changed now, right? I think they've changed it and they calling it something else, but I can't remember.
No, it's still PPP because or
Okay.
at least that's what it says on the form.
Yes.
Um, the thing that I think that preferred placement is a phenomenal tool.
Hmm.
The danger with that, and something that I know I've talked to a few spouses about, is they're so leery of using that because if you do get selected, let's just say you shotgun that out with every job you apply for in USA Jobs, you're putting preferred placement on all of them. If you get selected for, let's say somebody like me whose background is primarily security, if I get selected for a admin job with preferred placement, and I go, you know what, I really don't want a GS4 job. Sorry, you can no longer use it for the rest of the time that you're at that duty location.
Yeah. So it's been about 12 or 13 years since I tried to use the priority placement
Mhm.
program, and that was in California. And at that time, what I recall is that um, it would only benefit me for the specific
Mhm.
job series and level that was on the form.
Mhm.
So if there was a job that had very similar duties, but it
Right.
wasn't the same, like GS 0301
Mhm.
level 9 or level 11, or if it wasn't exactly the same, then it
Mhm.
would do nothing for me. And
Gotcha.
in the end, that was actually what happened. It didn't do anything for me at all. Um, I think it has been helpful for some, but
Mhm.
not many. And again, it's been like 12 years since I used it, so I'm a little rusty.
Yeah, it's definitely changed a lot. Now you can apply it for essentially whatever job.
Hmm.
If there is a spot for military spouse, and you can select also priority placement. But once you, like, for me, I've been very strategic about where I've used it, and to this point it has not mattered. It has
Mhm.
given me zero benefit whatsoever. But if I were to get selected again for a GS4 job, which I normally would never get through the door for because of my background and experience, but if I was like, no, I really don't want it, then it's scrapped until you
Oh,
PCS.
yeah. So that I think is still the same with spouse hiring preference. Or I guess it's not technically a hiring preference, but direct hire authority for military
Yeah.
spouses. If you are offered a job using that authority and
Mhm.
you turn it down, you can't use it again until you PCS to a
Yep.
new duty station. And you can only use it once per duty station anyway.
Mhm.
So if you had the very rare fortune of staying someplace for 5 or 6 or 7 years,
Right.
or I met a spouse recently who her service member stayed in San Diego for his entire active duty career and
Oh, wow.
retired from there, then you could only use it once that
Mhm.
entire time. There's no wiggle room, no ifs, ands, or buts. So I have had the benefit of um, being hired under that authority a couple of times. That has actually helped me as a military spouse, but it definitely comes with constraints.
Yeah, and the direct hire authority also moves faster than the USA Jobs process. I was trying to explain to a friend of mine about how long it takes from the time you actually see a job posting till the time that you may or may not get a call.
Hmm.
And there was a job I worked in Alaska where it was 6 months from the
Hmm.
time I had applied until the time I had an interview. I had forgotten I had applied.
I've had that experience too.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like they call like, "Hey, are you still interested in this job?" I'm like,
What job?
what job?" Because in that, I mean, in 6 months, you've applied to 80 jobs or more.
Yeah. And you
So,
may have moved.
and you
I
may have
had that
moved.
experience, yeah, recently where I got an email about a job, a federal job that I applied for like 4 years ago.
Oh wow.
Like, man, I've had three jobs since then. I've moved
Like,
on.
are you still
But
interested? I'm not even in the same country. No.
nope. Thank you, but no, thank you. That's not going to work.
Is it remote and making more money than I'm making now? Then maybe.
No, no, it was not. Um, but yeah, it's a real challenge. And that's one benefit of that direct hire authority, that if hiring managers choose to use that, it can be quicker. Um, I had a similar experience when I worked for the State Department. Um, certain applicants, I think veterans are one group that if you apply for a certain State Department job as a veteran, you can even bypass the interviews. You don't have to compete with the other candidates. They can just select you
Yeah.
because you're qualified and you're a veteran. So there are instances where that can be faster for sure. Yes.
Yeah, there's as we've said multiple times, there's a multitude of issues that go into this, and it's not going to be a one-click fix,
Mm-mm.
but it's going to take people that recognize it's an issue and that are willing to say, yes, we want to help fix this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's going to take the right people to push the right buttons.
Yeah, I think you really need in this situation, you need senior leaders who understand the importance of this issue, who understand how it is impacting military recruitment, retention, how it is impacting national security, how it's impacting military quality of life, how it's impacting food insecurity for military families. Um, and they need to have a really strong personal interest in solving this problem, because I know that we have leaders who mean well and who want to do good things and who care and who have seen the impacts, but there are so many competing demands for their time and their energy, not to mention the government's money. It is hard to keep this issue high enough on the priority list with everything else that's going on around the world. And it's going to take sustained effort
Right.
to make it happen. And so, that's the only thing that I can think of, that sustained effort is going to come from someone who has a real personal interest in this issue.
Right. And it's like we were discussing before, even, with General Brown and his wife actually
Mm-hmm.
like making note, like speaking publicly about the military spouse network and how information travels through spouses circles. Even with somebody like that at that level, there's only so much they're going to be able to do at their, because General Brown just got confirmed as to be the
Right.
Joint Chiefs, which is great,
Right.
love it.
Yes.
That just means now he's got a whole lot more responsibility than he did
Right.
before.
Right. He's got new problems.
Yeah, he's got new problems now. So even though it seemed for a little bit that, oh, spouses have a voice at the top,
Mm-hmm.
now there's how much attention is that still going to be able to get now? I mean, it's
Yeah, and he is not the end all be all for this issue,
right.
despite his role. You need support from lawmakers as
Mhm.
well. You need support from leaders in industry. It really takes, I said, yes, it's really going to take a leader who has the personal commitment to this issue, but he's not going to be able to do alone. He's going to
Right.
need a coalition of people who are willing to work toward a solution on this issue. And Um, it's a challenge. You know, there's no easy way around it. It is a challenge with all of the other competing demands for for military leaders. It's easy to see how this gets bumped down, bumped
Yes.
down the priority list. I get it. I totally, completely get it. But your options are either fix it now while it's fixable,
Mhm.
or continue to wait and see what the impacts are down the road. See if it gets worse, you know,
And
which I hope that's not the answer.
I agree with you. I really hope it's not the answer because to me, and of course, I have a very biased opinion of this. It seems like this is one of those issues that if they put forth, just a little bit of extra effort into, like you said, measuring the data, or for one, looking for the data. Let's just see what data is out there, and then measuring it, seeing what's quantifiable with this. It's a problem that there are no. I can see very few downsides if they tried to fix it.
Hmm. Yeah, I think there are arguments that I hear sometimes is that,
Mhm.
well, you can't just do that because the unions. Okay, yes, there many federal employees are members of unions, and yes,
Mhm.
the unions would definitely be involved in conversations about either increasing hiring preference for military spouses or what have you.
Right.
Yes, that is an argument. I understand why that is a valid concern. Other thing is like, well, what about veterans' preference? Veterans deserve these jobs more than military spouses. Yes, I understand that. If you look at the data, it's always back to the data.
Right.
Right now, veterans have a lower rate of unemployment in the US than the general public. So they're doing well.
Yeah.
They're doing really well in terms of jobs right now. Um, this is why I think it's so important to keep relying on those numbers. That 22% figure is just so astronomical and so unlike other comparable groups.
Right. I mean, and I had even, and I shared that with you last week that I saw that during COVID it spiked to like 38%, and
Yeah,
and
yeah,
I'm sure it's starting to kind of level back out, but it's been at the same 22% for
for
like
a
10
decade.
years. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's despite all of our best efforts and despite all of the scholarships and education programs and certifications, and despite the hiring preference and despite direct hire authority, it has remained at 22% for a decade. And I really believe that that is a modest estimate, because
Right.
I think you and I have both seen how many people just give up
Yeah.
and decide, okay, well, I guess I'm not going to have a
Mhm.
career. I'm going to go volunteer. I'm going to
Yeah.
be a stay-at-home parent, which, don't get me wrong, that is work. It's just
Oh my God.
unpaid.
Yes.
Um, yeah, so I think that 22% figure is not really telling the whole story.
And I would agree with you because for one, the military benefits greatly from spouses volunteering, and
Hmm.
there's several programs that are on different bases that they wouldn't be there without spouses volunteering, and it's great that there are spouses that want to volunteer.
Yeah.
But, and I always feel bad saying but, it's like but, uh
And
and but some spouses, they really, like, for me, I've worked since I was 15. I mean, even really before that, I used to walk around my neighborhood with a lawnmower cutting
yeah,
grass.
I used to cut grass. I feel
So,
you.
right, so it's feeling, for me, working is a part of who I am. Feeling like
Mhm.
I'm contributing, feeling like my effort is worth something to somebody else is important to me. Even if it's
Mhm.
just doing my own thing, but getting feedback from other people that they appreciate the effort that I'm giving
Yeah,
is important.
yeah,
I
it
think a
is.
lot of spouses feel that way.
They do. And to your point, that was another Army job that I had many years ago. I was the Army Volunteer Corps coordinator on the Kaiserslautern installation in Germany. And that was my job, to help military spouses and family members find suitable volunteer positions locally where they could contribute and be a part of a team and make use of their talents and their education and their training. And I am quoted somewhere years ago in a newspaper about a very large event that we did every year there in Kaiserslautern. It was an international Special Olympics event where we would bring in athletes from around Germany and I believe from other countries too. It was huge. It was, at the time, it was the largest German-American cooperative event every year in the country.
Nice.
And that's my quote in the newspaper. This would not be possible without our volunteers. So yes, there are definitely programs that spouses and family members, and some of our volunteers were also active duty, to be fair. They were doing this on their off hours, but that never, ever would have been possible without the large number of volunteers that we had.
Yep, I mean, volunteers they do make the world go round. There's a lot of things that I've been involved in over the years and have volunteered for happily and have gotten a lot of really positive feedback just from being there. Like, and you know, again, felt like I was contributing, all those things, like seeing my impact there. Every once in a while, it's nice to get that paycheck though.
Well, it is. And it's, yeah, volunteering is great. However, if you're looking at, particularly with military families, the long-term financial implications of having a single income family versus a dual income family, when you're thinking about retirement and one spouse in this pair has no retirement savings, your future is very different from what it could be otherwise. And I think it can create real financial difficulty for veterans and their families down the road. And, you know, it's something that deserves attention.
Yeah, because that changes the conversation entirely as to your spouse getting to 20 and going, okay, I'm going to retire versus, okay, well, maybe I stick it out another 10 years and try to have a slightly bigger retirement.
Yeah.
Because the retirement difference between 20 and 30 isn't that it's different, but it's not that extra stress that they can experience in those 10 years. I mean,
right.
You're looking at maybe some spouses deploy another 3 to 4 times in those 10 years or more.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
So that's a whole nother
10 years.
conversation.
Yeah. Going from 10 to 20 on active duty is not a joke. It's nothing to sneeze at, as they say. And if that's your only option to create retirement stability, you know, I think we owe our families more options.
Yeah. And how many service members, once they do hit 20, they feel like they have to immediately go back to work because
they do. Because they still have bills to pay, and because the spouse has been in a support role essentially throughout their career and has a choppy resume that that looks like mine and yours. And they have lost so much earning potential over the years that even if they did go and land a great job at a great company, it would take so much time to make up the lost earning. And you're never gonna reach that same earning potential that you could have if you were able to build a solid career throughout. So that's why I would love to see the federal government take a more active role in hiring military spouses into those remote friendly career development pathways, because that would change the conversation.
Yes.
If you could do that as a spouse, then when it comes time to have the conversation about should the service member retire, should the service member leave active duty, you're now not just talking about the service member's career, you're talking about 2 careers, and that changes the calculus. I think it would really have an impact on active duty retention. I really do.
Now, have you seen, or are you aware of if there's been a bigger uptick in remote work for military families? I mean, I haven't seen it personally.
I think it depends on the employer. It's not necessarily, yes, military spouses, not all, but military spouses largely are looking for remote work for obvious reasons, but it comes down to the employer in my experience. And if we're talking about the federal government, there are some organizations who seem to be more remote friendly than others. I've seen GSA being fairly remote friendly. I've seen the VA being fairly remote friendly for a lot of their roles, but other organizations have less of that flexibility when they're hiring. And I don't know if that's because of, organizational culture or hiring manager preference or whatever. But that's a question that I get often from spouses who reach out to me is, how can I find a remote job? And there's no easy answer for that.
Yeah, and I know one thing that for me is felt almost deceptive is the wrong word. I think companies are using the network that is there to their advantage. Is you will see a job that is remote, that's labeled remote.
Mm-hmm.
And for example, I've seen this a lot with the CDC lately. Is there'll be the Center for Disease Control, not the Child Development Center. Yeah. I always forget that one's on both sides.
Yeah.
They will have a job labeled remote, and it's like, oh, this is a job that's very interesting to me. And then you click on it, it's only remote if you're within 50 miles of that location.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
I
that
don't,
feels very disingenuous to me.
yeah, I don't understand the rationale, I guess. But it should say in the description if they expect you to be there one day a week or once a
Right.
month or what have you, that should be listed. But then in my mind, that's not remote.
Exactly.
That's hybrid.
Yeah. If
So I don't
if
know. Maybe does USA Jobs allow you to designate remote or hybrid? Is there a hybrid option on USA
Mhm.
Jobs? I haven't checked that out.
Yep, there's a hybrid option. There, and it'll tell you in the description how many days you're expected to be in
Ah,
the
okay.
office versus wherever. But I know there was some that were labeled remote, and it was only remote if for the CDC job it was if you were within 50 miles of Atlanta, you could be remote. If you were there's another job that you could be remote if you lived in like one of these four cities,
Mm-hmm.
and it's just like, then why even say it's remote?
Yeah,
Like,
to me, remote is further than that. But again, I'm not a hiring manager and I'm not HR, so I'm not the one making that call.
yeah, well, 50 miles from Atlanta still could be a 3-hour commute. So,
Yeah.
because,
Yeah. Yeah, that's fair. Yeah. Man, that's one thing I do not miss. I've been completely remote now since about April of
mm,
2020, and I do not miss that hectic morning routine,
yes,
getting myself ready and fed, getting the kids ready and fed. You got to walk the dog first. You got to, then drop off the first one at the elementary school before care. Then you got to take the second one to the daycare center, and
yep,
you're still trying to get to the office by 8 or 8:30, and it's a mad rush. And then
yeah,
the reverse in the afternoon. It was so hectic that I made a routine of setting alarms in my Outlook calendar
oh
every day
goodness,
at like 4 p.m. or 4:30 p.m. just so I wouldn't get distracted and miss my window to leave the office and still get the kids on time.
yeah, because then if you
It's
don't get the kids on time, they charge you.
right. And then your kids are going to be freaking out like, where's
Yep.
my mom? What happened?
Hmm.
No, we're not doing that. So every day on my Outlook calendar, there was a pop-up reminder, pick up kids in all caps.
And that sounds terrible, but I 100% relate, because it's like you're doing stuff and you're trying to get something done,
Mhm,
and you're like, okay, I'm almost there, and then
mhm.
you get that pop up, you're like, crap, now this has to wait till tomorrow.
Yeah, because when I really get involved in a work project, it's like I tune out the rest of the world and
Right.
I am just, fully focused on what I'm doing. Um, so yeah, I still live by reminders. Like my phone is going to beep at 5 p.m. to remind me to go meet the bus. Don't forget. So,
Hey, that's what it's completely off topic, but like that one thing that was interesting about where we moved to, there are no buses.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
this is a completely walking or take your kid to school area,
Hmm.
which
We
was
had that
wild to
experience
me.
in Northern Virginia too. We lived within a certain radius of the
Mhm.
school, so there were no buses. And here we are like, I don't know if I actually mentioned where I am, but I'm in Denmark. I'm in Copenhagen, and the kids go to an international school here, and there is no bus. All the students either walk or ride their
Mhm.
bike or take the metro. But because we're affiliated with the embassy has chartered transportation for them
Well,
in
that's
the
cool,
mornings and the afternoons. So it's not a big yellow school bus. It's more like a van, but
right?
we call it a bus anyway.
Well, and that's also a cultural thing too, because Denmark is a very cycling friendly,
It
like
is.
it is a very pedestrian friendly country. I mean,
Yeah,
that's a little bit of a cultural thing too. I'm very, very
it is.
jealous of you being in Copenhagen because the only pictures I've seen are from my buddy Mark, who went over there for like the midnight tattoos because he was with the U.S. Army as
Hmm.
their principal
Hmm.
percussionist, and so I would always see pictures of them doing they have the big festival where all the drummers wear like these really crazy looking masks when they march down the streets. It's
Yeah, it's a
gorgeous.
beautiful city, and I saw a statistic I think last year that more than half
Mhm.
of Danes use a bicycle to commute every day.
Yeah.
Winter, summer,
Mhm.
rain, sleet, snow. It
It's
is
just a different
intense.
culture.
It is a different culture and they love it. And the
Mhm.
level of commitment is there. And it's we lived in Norway for a couple of years too, and there's a
Mhm.
similar kind of attitude about weather. It's that there's no such thing as bad weather, only bad clothing. So if you're cold and wet, it's your fault
It's your
entirely.
fault.
You should have planned better. Yeah,
And we said the same thing whenever we were whenever we were in Alaska. It's there's it's not too cold. You just didn't dress right, basically.
that's true. It's true. And
So
for us, I like you, I grew up in Louisiana,
mhm.
so I never experienced a real winter until we moved to Germany in
Oh
like
yeah.
2006. That was my first time. And I thought, oh, this is so terrible. I can't do this. So when we left Germany, my only request was, can we please go somewhere warm? Because I haven't
Right.
worn shorts in like 3.5 years. This is not okay. So we went to California and I definitely thawed out there
Right.
where it was super hot. But that assignment to Norway changed the way that I thought about winter forever. Because when we
Mhm.
found out we were going to Norway, I was like, oh no, winter, but on steroids.
Right.
This is gonna be a lot. I'm terrified. So I ordered the biggest, baddest snow boots
Oh
known to
yeah.
man. I ordered the big coats and all the
Mhm.
wool, everything. And actually, I learned to really enjoy winter there.
Yeah.
I really, I had snow tires on the
Mhm.
car and all-wheel drive, and that makes such a big difference.
Huge difference.
It's not the same experience of when you accidentally get 1 inch of snow in Baton Rouge on an off day and everybody's freaking out. It's definitely
cars
not the same,
cars in the
right?
ditches everywhere.
Just slid over my mailbox. Don't mind me. No, it's not like that. It's everybody knows what they're doing.
Uh-huh.
It's business as usual, but it's also beautiful and fluffy and white. And I kind of love it. I kind of love it now. So
Yeah,
I'm one of the
whenever
rare people, I think, who was born and raised in Louisiana, and I consider myself a very good snow driver.
hey,
So
I look, we spent 3 years in Alaska, so I would challenge you on that, or at least put myself on that same level
can
because
we have a can we have a snow like drive off
drive off,
sometime? We'll have a
put a
competition.
put a GoPro up in the windshield wipe.
Okay, no chains allowed. Snow
No,
tires only.
hey, we did we rocked Blizzaks in Alaska.
Okay.
So
Okay, so Norway is so, everybody there is very like eco-friendly. They
mhm,
all, not all, okay, but it seemed like they all
right.
drive Teslas. And I
Mhm.
loved nothing more than seeing a Tesla driving through the snow with studded tires on. For me, that was just such an amazing sight because you don't hear it. You don't hear
Yeah,
it coming.
you can
You
just hear
can
the
hear the
tires.
studs a little bit if they hit the pavement, but
Yeah.
otherwise, it's like a ghost in the winter. You wouldn't even know I was coming. It's
Man,
amazing.
I'll tell you the one of the funny things whenever you mention, people in Baton Rouge driving, I guess it was 2000, it was probably 2008. There was a big ice storm in Baton Rouge,
Hmm.
2008, 2009. And I was working as a police officer and I had to go to work.
Mhm.
and I was coming down. I was going down 10 to get to the Nicholson Drive exit, and I
Yep.
came over an overpass. And as I came over this overpass, it was like something out of a movie. There were just cars bouncing off of each other, sliding, and all I could think of is I don't have enough money to fix this car because my wife was in vet school. Uh,
Mm.
and it was seriously something out of a movie. These two cars in front of me bounced off of the outside guardrails and were coming together. And I was just like, at this point, I'm aiming my car because it's a sheet of
Yeah.
ice.
Yeah. There's nothing you can do.
And right before the three of us hit, these two cars hit each other and then parted, and I went right through the middle. And I mean, when I say white knuckling, I think I had to pry my fingers off of the steering wheel because it was the most horrifying experience ever. But
I love the
Nobody in Baton Rouge has snow tires. I mean, there's
No,
no
absolutely
infrastructure
not.
for
And
that.
there's no salt for the roads. There's
No.
nothing. The image that I always associate with snow in Baton Rouge is a dump truck driving down the streets and a
Mhm.
couple of guys standing in the back with shovels
Shovels.
tossing sand out onto the road because that's it. That's your only option.
That
So
and all the frat boys getting up on top of the Indian mounds on campus, sliding down on
sliding, yeah,
cardboard.
I hear you. So yeah, experiences that I never would have had without the military for
Right.
sure.
Yeah, and I know like people are gonna be like, man, y'all really don't like y'all's lives. I've really enjoyed because we've been complaining, not really complaining, we've been discussing about the difficulties of military spouse employment, but that's just one thing, right?
Mhm.
I mean, we both have gotten to live in places that people pay a lot of money to go take vacations to.
Absolutely.
And there's a lot of things that I definitely don't take for granted that have been benefits that I've been exposed to as being a military spouse.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean that things can't get better.
Correct. Yeah. And for me, um, the career challenge
Mhm.
has been the biggest challenge of this entire 17-year experience. For me, not for everyone, but
Right.
for me, it has been harder than deployments and
Mhm.
TDYs and PCS moves and solo parenting
Yeah.
and the stress of, when they're gone away for school.
Mhm.
It has been harder for us than any of those other things. And so it's not, in my mind, it's not a matter of venting or complaining because
Right.
I am really out here trying to share resources and ideas
Yes.
and trying to solve this problem in
Mhm.
whatever way I can contribute to that. I would like to.
Mhm.
But it's also about awareness, and it's about letting other spouses know that they're not alone if they
Right.
are feeling the same way that I did. Because there was a time when some of those feelings were pretty intense
Yeah.
and they were difficult to deal with. And I felt alone. So I
Mhm.
want to make sure that other people know that they're not alone.
Yeah, and you're 100% right. I've had those same feelings. I shared with you last week that during one of my wife's last deployments, and I was at that point probably 100 job applications into trying to find work, and just literally breaking down, going, "What is wrong with me? Why can't I find work?"
Right.
Because so many people only want to talk about the good stuff. They don't want to actually
Mhm.
talk about what's happening. And I hate to use this term, but they don't want to talk about what's happening down in the trenches, like where
Mhm.
it's dirty and nobody likes to shine that light. But we've both said before, we're trying to leave it better than we found it, because if we're experiencing this, then there's hundreds or thousands of other spouses that are experiencing this and may not realize that there's this many people feeling the same
Yeah.
way they feel.
Yeah. And they don't all have access to the same resources that we have.
Right.
They may not have, you know, reliable childcare. They may
Mhm.
not have the benefit of already completing a couple of degrees.
Right.
They may not have the benefit of understanding how this industry works or that industry works.
Mhm.
And it was a long and challenging learning experience for me. you know, you made a comment that, oh, wow, you know, you're more informed on this issue than I am. But that's just because I had so much time
Right.
to figure it out. 17 years is a long time to study one issue. And I did. So that's really what it is. And I also, I kind of have a belief that I came to several years ago that if I'm gonna go through something that's that difficult,
Yeah.
it helps me to find meaning in that if
Mhm.
I can use that experience to help other people.
Absolutely.
So, yes, it was hard. Yes, it was a real challenge. Yes, it was a strain for my family and my marriage. But if I can take something from that to help other people, then it feels
Mhm.
like it was worth it.
Yes. And that's a great way to look at it too, because it makes you feel like you came out on the other side stronger than whenever you went in.
Right.
Especially if you're able to especially if you're able to get to a point where you have people reaching out and you do have the ability to say, have you looked at this? Have you done this? Yes, it sucks. I'm not telling you it doesn't suck, but you can do it.
You can. Somebody asked me recently, and I know we're going a little bit long on time, so I'll try to keep my thoughts concise. But somebody asked me recently, can you recommend an ideal career for a military spouse? And I said, absolutely not.
Nope.
No, because the ideal career for you is the one that you feel strongly enough
Mhm.
about that you're going to have the determination to continue pursuing it even through all of these challenges and
Right.
roadblocks, because they will come.
Mhm.
And if it's a job that you just sort of decided you might like to work in
Right.
and somebody recommended it, boy, I would have given up so fast. But because I really enjoy the work that I do, I
Uh-huh.
think that has driven me over the years to continue working and striving and trying to find creative ways to make this happen.
Have you felt yourself getting more passionate about being an advocate for spouse employment the more you've dug into it?
Yes, definitely. And that's hard because I tend to bite off more than I can chew sometimes.
Uh-huh.
So I say yes to almost anything. And then I realize, wait, I overcommitted. That's too much. I keep I'm still I don't want to tell you how old I am. I am still a certain age and I'm like, I should go back to school again. If I got a PhD, then people would listen to me when I talked
Right.
about this. And that's absolutely ridiculous thinking. And I don't know that I even have the time to devote to that, but it's still back there in the back of your mind. It's like, but I care about this a lot and I could
Right.
do some research and maybe I could, maybe I could do more to help. And it's always there.
See, you messed up because you told me last time when you graduated, so I know we're the same age. because we
We'll keep that
graduate
between
because
us.
we graduated college the same year, so I know we're the same age.
It's
Man, but I had to say, I swore to myself I would never get a PhD.
I
Swore,
said that same thing.
and
And
yeah.
we'll see. We'll see.
And then I was talking to a friend of mine. Like, we were from the same hometown, and he got his PhD. And then I was talking to another guy. He's one of my mentors, and he's not military connected at all. He was my mentor through getting my second master's, and he's just become a good friend. And he was like,
Mhm,
Mike, once you've got your master's, you're like halfway there.
mhm.
But I'm like, I don't want to write a dissertation. I've already written two theses. I don't want to. Is that even plural? I've already written. I've already done a
I
capstone
know.
and a thesis,
I
and I don't want to do
know.
a dissertation.
I don't mind the writing. For me, the big hurdle right now is the time
Hmm.
for classes and research with often, not always, but often being a solo parent
Yeah,
and working full time. And that just feels like a really big time commitment.
and it
And I don't
is.
know, I don't know how much I'm willing to ask my family to sacrifice for that particular goal right
Right.
now.
Well, and
So
it
we'll
was
see.
funny. You mentioned earlier about how difficult you know not having a job is compared to the other things, and I can't agree with you more, because
Mhm,
I've done the solo parenting. We've done the PCS. I've done the solo PCS. I've done
mhm, mhm,
all of the things that are supposed to be, oh my gosh, how did you survive that? And
mhm.
you just do it.
It's
You
just
you
logistics.
you don't really have an option. You have to get from point A to point B,
Yep.
and you just figure it out as you go. But the not having consistent, meaningful employment for me has been the hardest thing in
I agree.
13 years, because my wife's only
Yeah.
been in for 13. So
Yeah, I agree. I agree. So, you know, it matters.
it does.
I think we talked about this last time too, that somebody accused me of being entitled when I talk
Mhm.
about this, and that, oh wow, you know, you sound really entitled saying that you deserve a career or whatever. I get it. I understand where you're
Mhm.
coming from. But what I'm saying spouses are entitled to is that we are entitled to being a full, complete person
Yes.
and not an accessory.
Yes.
Right. And a full, complete person would have the ability to build a career if they chose to. That's not the path for everybody. I understand. Some people are just tickled to be a stay-at-home parent or tickled
Mhm.
to be a homemaker. And I'm truly delighted for them. And I don't want to
Yeah.
imply that all spouses should have careers because I don't think that's true. But I think it should be an option and it should be possible for the people who choose that path.
I agree. It should be, most spouses just want the opportunity
Yep.
to even be in the running. Because a lot of times it
Yeah.
doesn't even feel like we're in the running to be considered.
Yep.
So, oh man, Ellen, I don't want to take more of your time. I know you are in a completely different time zone by several things, and you've got other things you've got going on. Where can people connect with you at? I know you're really big on LinkedIn.
Yeah, LinkedIn is the easiest. Find me. I think I'm probably the only Ellen Summey on LinkedIn. I honestly am not sure, but Summey. Find me, send me a request. I accept almost anybody unless they are trying to sell me financial advising services or
How to
something.
grow your network.
Right?
take
No,
take
thank
this
you.
class to grow your network.
Yeah, no, thank you. So yeah,
Awesome.
I would love
Well,
to connect.
this has been exactly what I thought it was going to be. This was a really good conversation. I really enjoyed connecting with you again. So you have a wonderful rest of your day, Ellen. Thank you so much for being on the show,
Yeah,
and we'll
thank
chat
you.
again
This was,
soon.
yes, Michael, this was a really fun conversation. I enjoyed it, and I'm looking forward to seeing what you do next.
Awesome. Thanks. Well, you have a great day, and we'll chat later.
Okay, you too.
Bye.